How's it going, everyone? Pull out your notebooks. Class is now in session, and today we're going to talk about a build for Levia going into Hunted. On the surface, Syndra and Fang seem pretty scary. And they are. They're just more aggression. They have more damage that cannot be prevented no matter how hard we try. And it's really going to cause a problem for trying to keep ourselves above that 13 life threshold. But we have options. We have choices. Are they good? I don't know. I've done zero testing. This is just my initial build going into the season. Now that we know all of the cards and all of the tools these new heroes have at their disposal. So to start, I'm just going to throw the equipment in there. Obviously, Apex makes it arm slot that get 5 value. You can't beat it, you know? I don't think there's any other arm slot in the game that gets 5 value besides, what's it called? Grasp of the Arcanite. And that's just infinite value, technically. Right? Hooves, main board, easy. Having that guaranteed go again is or that guaranteed extra action point is one of the most important things we can have on our foot slot. They will not be in for every matchup, but they will certainly be in for the majority of the non-Fang, non-Syndra matchups. I guess the non-aggressive matchups. And you'll see why they won't be coming in later. Next up, we have Mandible Claws. These play with the core of the deck, which is still Blood Rush Bellows. Until they get rid of Blood Rush Bellows, it's going to be Mandible Claw, Blood Rush Bellows, or until they get rid of Mandible Claw. That's what we're going to have. Hopefully we get that theoretical Shadow Claw not too late after Mandible Claws leave when KOLLs, but we shall see. Savage Sash in the sideboard. It's a very good card, and certainly very useful into aggro matchups where you're not getting the full block out of the Carrion Husk. Scouting Fleshbag, main deck, it's still the best option we have for our head slot. There is no other head slot that even remotely comes close into most matchups. Now, Spoiled Skull is a very good card, and we will certainly have the Spoiled Skull in the sideboard. Spoiled Skull obviously comes in for AB, comes in for fatigue matchups. Just being able to get that 4th Blood Rush Bellows, that 4th Shadowrun Horror, that 4th Red Dread Screamer is so incredibly important. On top of that, having that extra turn where it's late game, you have 12, 13 Blood Debt, and you draw a hand that doesn't banish. Spoiled Skull, you probably have a Banisher in Banish, so you banish it, and you get that easy get out of jail free card. That one definitely goes in the inventory. Next, let's look at the Shadow equipments. Carrion Husk needs no introduction. Flat out the best defensive piece of equipment in the game when you can remove that blood debt downside. I'm putting this main board just because I like to have Husk main board, but certainly you can put Savage Sash main board if you think that you're going to run into more aggressive, more low to the ground aggressive decks than you will larger single hit decks. Levia redeemed, consumed. It's the entire reason we play the deck at this point. Coming in, setup. Okay, so now let's talk about the replacement leg slot coming into Hunted season. And the answer to that is, I'm just going to type it up. Was it quick? There we go. Quick dodge flexors. There we go. Quick dodge flexors are incredibly good in Levia. They're not great in every deck, but any deck that runs a surplus of blues or has non-blocking blues takes such huge advantage of these. I posted a full breakdown in League of Levia, but in Levia you can expect to get an average of 4.14 bonus block. So at its base, these, if you pitch a blue and cover a 3 chain link wide turn, these will block for 6. Now, assuming that your blue blocks for 3, these flexors add an extra 3 block value on top of what the blue would have blocked. Looking at Levia builds, we run somewhere in the realm of 7, which is about 1/3 of our blues as non-blocks or base non-blocks. Certainly Diabolic Offering and Mutated Mass can gain block value depending on the state of the game. And Quick Dodge actually play into that Mutated Mass by allowing us to get a card in our pitch zone on our opponent's turn to block with a Mutated Mass that we might have in our hand. Turning what originally blocked for nothing into something that blocked for 2. And in that case, the Quick Dodge goes from, let's say we have a Deadwood Rumbler and a Mutated Mass in our hand as our blues. We can turn those 2 blues that didn't block for anything into blocking for 8, which is incredibly high value. So with those 7-ish blues that don't block, now we're looking at 1/3 of our deck, which gets 1/3 of our blues, which gets 6 bonus block value on this. I mean, that is insane. Turning a card in your hand which does not block into 6 block value is almost unheard of. We can take advantage of Quick Dodge flexors better than almost any other deck in the game can. I think Enigma is the only deck which can take better advantage of Quick Dodge flexors than we can. So this is going in the inventory just because it is so incredibly strong for Levia specifically. So we're at 10 cards out of our 80. I do want to add in some null rune equipment. Specifically, I want to add in the null rune gloves in case you run into Verdance or Kano, and I want to add in the Arcane Lantern. That's not how you spell Arcane. There you go. Arcane Lantern for Viserai or Vincent. Into Auxilio or Aurora. You can run Arcane Lantern into Auxilio or Aurora. However, when Aurora deals arcane damage, it's just as an added bonus to her already absurd damage numbers. Pitching a blue for Arcane Lantern does not do as much, whereas against Vis, he can have those oscillating turns of big physical, big magical, big physical, big magical, or the one setup into the one pop off, and certainly using the Arcane Lantern on that turn to help mitigate damage is a lot more useful, just because his turns aren't as big if he doesn't do a full setup. So that's why you bring Arcane Lantern in for Vis and why it's not recommended for Aurora. For Auxilio, you're either bringing AB3 or you're bringing AB0. There's no in between. I'm not giving up just because Auxilio tends to have, that forgo again spell, right? Your Scowling Fleshbag is going to get a lot of value in that game. Your Bone Breakers are going to get a lot of value in that game. So I'm not giving up Fleshbag for Spoiled Skull or Bone Breaker for Gloves. It's not happening. Which means that I would only be bringing in a Arcane Lantern, and if you can't get to minimum AB2, don't even bother. And I'm not getting to AB2, so I'm not even gonna bother. Kill him dead. He has 4 less life. He does not block well at all. Just run him over. So that closes out my set of equipment for this new list. Now let's take a look at how we're building the deck. So as of right now, every Levia deck, just because it is the strongest card in Brute, Blood Rush Bellow. Put it in, 3 copies, and then of course Blood Rush Bellow's best friend, Beast Within. For those of you who don't know, Beast Within not only helps you refill your hand when you discard a card, but because Beast Within banishes the card from your deck, it doesn't matter how many cards you have to banish to hit that 6 off Beast Within. Levia will still see a card with power 6 or greater banished, and thus Beast Within will always turn off Blood Debt. This additionally has synergy with Call the Grave, which is of course one of our favorite blues, and you can always call the grave of Beast Within, right? And Beast Within would then be put into the graveyard from your deck, not from the combat chain. Therefore, it would trigger banishing a card and turning a hand which does not turn off Blood Debt into a hand which does turn off Blood Debt. Okay, so just like in the over-explained video, we're now looking to maximize our 6 density. And we do want to start with our blues. We need to make sure we have a good resource base. Deadwood Rumbler is one of those cards that pairs incredibly well with Quick Dodge Flexors, right? This is a part of our blue base that normally doesn't block, but with the Quick Dodge Flexors, suddenly that pearl in the bottom right-hand corner becomes block for 6, which is so incredibly helpful and useful in the aggro matchups. And the other blue card we're looking for, because right now we only have access to 2 base blue 6s. The other one we're looking for is Recurrent. It's a blue 6, it blocks for 3. We take it. We're happy with it. Mostly because we don't have another choice. From here, let's fill out our suite of aggression. I'm going to start with the shadow cards, just because they're where the majority of our power comes from. Boneyard Marauder still does its job wonderfully of, pitch a blue for a Blood Rush Bellow, draw 2 cards, you get a blue and you get a Boneyard Marauder. That is the 2 floating from the first pitch, sends your first claw. The blue in your hand sends a second claw, and then you have that 1 floating for the Boneyard Marauder. Any other cards you have left over are icing on the cake, and certainly you can even look to arsenal your Boneyard Marauder or arsenal another card in your hand on that turn that you did not need to hit that 18 damage on your Blood Rush turn. These go in, and they're just wildly overrated. You expect 0 for 4 to be the aggressive rate, and so going up to 1 resource is effectively 1 damage, so you expect 1 for 5. This is a single point overrate. But certainly when you pair it with a blue and a claw attack or something like Dread Screamer, now you're looking at turning that 1 card, that 1 resource card, into 12 damage on a non-Blood Rush turn, which is absolutely massive. And of course, Dread Screamer comes in. It is one of the best cards that we have in the deck. Speaking of being overrate, Endless Maw does its job incredibly well. You love to pitch a blue and a 2-card 9. Looking at an average of 4 aggressive value on a card. This is 4.5 aggressive value on a card. It is exactly what we're looking for. So we're going to put these in. They still serve their purpose, and worst comes to worst, if we don't have the space for them, they have a 3 in the bottom right hand corner, and that's all that matters. Moving forward, I'm not going to go over sideboard cards yet. We will come back to those. Shadow Realm Horror is by far the best card in the deck. Absolutely a powerhouse, and in many of my games, I go out of my way to manipulate my graveyard in such a way that Shadow Realm Horror is always as live as possible. In most cases, it is a better Hungering Slaughter Beast or a better Dread Screamer. Auto 3 of in every Levia list you ever build. And that's about it for our red shadow cards. So let's look at our red brute cards, and we're not going to have a lot of them still, just because a lot of the brute cards don't take advantage of Levia as a hero. Now, pulping is going to be less in demand in the coming format, just because everybody and their brother is going to be on a D-React. The new Draconic Heroes got D-Reacts built in. Whether they bring them in or not, I don't know. But every hero will have access to in-class D-Reacts. I'm not going to be very high on pulping. It just... With the prep, with how many D-Reacts we have, and especially with getting Shelter the Storm, if your opponent passes a turn with a card in Arsenal, you have to play around it being a D-React, and you have to play around that stuffing your turn. And I just don't think that it's worth it anymore. Shadow of Blasphemfet, on the other hand, I think does earn its place as a one-of in the deck, in the main board, because we are losing those pulping plays. I don't want 3, just because it does not have Go Again on its own. But opening the game with a Shadow of Blasphemfet in hand, being able to send one of those sideboard cards that I said that we'll talk about later, being able to send that on turn 0 in lieu of being able to go pulping into another attack, I think is incredibly important now that I'm not going to be on pulpings to mitigate getting blown out by D-Reacts. Swing Big still does swing big things. A 2-cost 8 is exactly where you want to be. It's wildly overrate, and in the event that we do get to flip, this is the best thing we can send on a flip turn. 3 of in the deck, and if it does anything other than, if it does nothing more rather than block for 3 and be a 6 in graveyard, that's perfectly fine. That's all we need. Wild Ride is still in just because it's going to be as aggressive. We would love to see a Wild Ride and being able to carry that extra AP over turn to turn. Maybe we Arsenal Wild Ride, or we use that Wild Ride to get an extra card in our graveyard. That way we can send more Blood Dead attacks sooner, is exactly what we're looking for. And one thing to note with these pearls, in the aggressive matchups, with the addition of quick dodge flexors, let's say you draw up a hand of Wild Ride, Shadow, Deadwood. Normally that hand blocks for 0. With quick dodge, that hand blocks for 2 on every chain link now. So you can take what would have been a no blocks hope I don't die turn into I can now mitigate somewhere between 6 and 8 damage minimum. And that's just such a huge upgrade for us with the quick dodge flexors. Okay, so we're at 19 reds, which is 1 to 2 short of what I really want, which is where I'm going to break from the normal Levia deck build strategy. In order to keep up with the way the format is going, which is a lot of aggro, it is becoming necessary now to put on hits in the deck. We don't need a lot, but the idea is, especially against the more aggressive decks, which don't block particularly well, such as Syndra, such as Aurora, having on hits will become very relevant. Now, the on hit you bring in depends on the deck, but certainly 2 of CNC or Erase Face is going to go a long way. Now, downsides to these are that they do not get buffed by Blood Rush Bellow. Do not get buffed by Blood Rush Bellow. So if you draw these as your Chain Ender on a Blood Rush Bellow turn, you're missing out 2 damage on what is supposed to be your highest damage turn. I think that this is an acceptable change. I think that this is an acceptable loss in terms of being able to keep up with the new decks in the format. Syndra and Fang both lose almost all of their turn if they get hit with an Erase Face. Vis loses a bunch of tempo. Aurora loses a bunch of tempo. Any any Dios that are floating around are forced to block this. So it gets an incredible amount of value. Also, the Earth heroes, their cards in Banish lose the Earth text. So any buffs they had from having 8 Earth cards in Banish or 4 Earth cards in Banish are gone. The on-hit is very relevant, and the prevailing thought beforehand was that Levia doesn't really have on-hits, so by adding an on-hit in, you allow your opponent to get more value out of their armor. And this is true. This statement doesn't change. But what does change is if we are looking to get aggressive, if we are looking to have to race people for our very lives, getting them off their armor sooner will make it easier for us to end the game. You do not keep a hand based on the power of a race face, based on the power of command and conquer. That's not what you do. You keep a hand based on the fact that you have a bunch of damage followed with an erase face. You have a bunch of damage followed with a command and conquer, something to make your opponents block. So they take a bunch of damage and then you make them block, reducing the damage output of their turn and buying us time into the matchup, buying us the ability to take tempo sooner. Expect the first command and conquer or erase face to be met with equipment. They give you one card, they give you a piece of equipment, and they call it a day. It's the second or third, and you notice I only have 2 here, but Shadowrun Horror, if it banishes one of these disruptive 6s, now you get to play it another time for just that single copy. And that's where it becomes really strong. So that second or third time will meaningfully neuter their damage output. And especially for a hero like Syndra or a hero like Aurora, who needs those larger hands, or certainly Vis if you catch him on a hand that does not have an aura in play to start, like Malefic. This is going to take what would have been an aggressive turn from them and turn it into just a middling turn that allows us to hopefully keep tempo and keep pushing damage. Okay, speaking of disruptive effects, Brute comes with their own disruptive effect, and that effect is Send Packing. Send Packing is kind of like CNC, except it's a lot worse. It still effectively has the text of D-Rex cannot be played from Arsenal to this, but being a 3 cost is a relevant downside, and allowing your opponent to play D-Rex from hand is also a downside. On the bright side, you do get to know what is in their arsenal because it banishes the card face up, but Send Packing is a weaker CNC. However, what Send Packing has that CNC doesn't have is that it is a yellow. Being part of our resource base means that if we draw it on a Blood Rush turn, there's a huge difference between drawing a Command and Conquer and drawing a Send Packing on a Blood Rush turn. Drawing a CNC on our Blood Rush turn is pretty awkward. We really don't want to see it unless we've already gone like Claw, go again, and then CNC. Like, that's fine. But drawing CNC, especially if we needed a resource card, just feels really, really bad because it doesn't get buffed and it only makes 1 resource. Drawing a Send Packing, on the other hand, it either gets buffed, right? We can bring it to an 8 if we have the extra resources, or it's just a Claw Swing. It just turns into a Claw Swing on a Blood Rush turn. Being a yellow is very important for Send Packing, and it's why I'm on 3 Send Packings right now and only 2 of these red disruptive effects, just because we're not going to get that buff on these red disruptive effects, and we're not going to get the just here's a Claw Swing out of these red cards. Having the yellow be disruptive is very, very, very important for us. Speaking of yellows, let's get Agile Windup in here. 2 Agile Windups main. Losing those pulpings means we need to make up for those extra action points somehow. We need to make up for those extra cards in graveyard somehow. And Agile Windups do that really, really well. They allow us to turn 0, discard Agile Windup, be set up for the next turn, and one of the things that really hampers our ability to do some of the things that KO can do is we can't just turn 0 Blood Rush or turn 1 Blood Rush, right? We have to, I guess not have to, but we should. Good Play says that you want to make sure that you have 3 cards in graveyard after you play Blood Rush Bellows, because if you Blood Rush and you have 2 cards in graveyard and you draw a hand where your only red attacks are banishers, you can't play them, and suddenly you've lost a bunch of value on your Blood Rush turn. We can't afford that. So having the Agile Windups in the main board to discard a unit, now that I'm saying that, I like the 3rd Agile Windup. It's just having that extra agility, and again, it's a yellow, so worst comes to worst, it turns into either it enables a claw swing or it turns into a claw swing. Either way, we're swinging a claw with it, and that's its worst. Certainly, if we need to, we can pitch it into quick dodge flexors and get that extra. Now quick dodge flexors only gets +2 on blocking with the Agile Windup, but it effectively adds an extra card to our hand, right? Because the Agile Windup would have blocked for 2. Quick dodge flexors, if we pitch Agile Windup, blocks for 2 copies of Agile Windup. So as much as that is definitely, making the most of a bad situation, it is still an advantage that we get for running this yellow 2 cost, and it takes a card which has a meaningful downside of only being a 2 block and allows us to use our boots to leverage this into having less of a downside and having more of an upside. Another card in the yellow slot, right? We're still looking at yellow cards that give us power and give us value, is Hungering Slaughterbeast. Hungering Slaughterbeast, worth its weight in gold. That's not a lot. Obviously, cards are pretty light, but Hungering Slaughterbeast is definitely worth its weight in gold. It gets a lot done for the slot. It blocks 3, it's a 6, it's a yellow, and it banishes. With that said, I'm only on 2, just because we are running low we are running low on yellow slots. But it is exactly what we want the slot to do. Right next to it is Graveling Growl. Graveling Growl is, let me get this on screen, it's another 6. It is a yellow 6, and again, worst comes to worst, it blocks 3. It's a 6 in graveyard, and certainly when we pair it with maybe a Blood Rush Bellows discarding Beast Within, right? Beast Within banishes a card with power 6 or greater. Graveling Growl says you can only play it if a card with 6 or more power has been put into your banish zone this turn. Well, there you go, right? Blood Rush Bellows discarding Beast Within, you get a Graveling Growl. This is just a 1 for 8. It's right up there with Boneyard Marauder, except Boneyard Marauder only makes 1 resource, Graveling Growl makes 2. It also works with the Dread Screamer or a Shadow Realm Horror. So Graveling Growl, 100% 3 of in the deck. Very, very good card. Mark of the Beast is another card that I was in heavy hitter season. I was low on Mark of the Beast, just because games were not that quick. You had plenty of time. You didn't always want to start that blood debt train ticking on turn 0, on turn 1. But now that games are going to be very fast, having Mark of the Beast and having 3 of them in your deck, again as a yellow 6, again as a card that blocks 3, is very important. And it banishes itself, right? So that allows you to be more defensive on a single AP turn, or on a turn where you have to be defensive, block out, and then you just send Mark of the Beast as your only card, and you stop your blood debt. You put another card in banish for whatever your end game is, whether it's Redeemed or it's Plasmafet, and you mitigate the heavy downside of blood debt of being Levia. Sitting at 20 yellows is right about where we want to be main board. We don't Levia tends to run a pretty even split of each color, and Mansant was on prismatic leyline for a moment. That seems a little wrong to me. I don't think we can take advantage of it, and I believe he was off it, but that is the reason why he was on it. So now let's look at filling out our blues. And the first thing I want to look at is Diabolic Offering. I was on 3 of these for a while. I'm now only on 2. Obviously, they play really well with Beast Within, Shadowrun Horror, and Dread Screamer. And they play really well with Quick Dodge Flexors. They're great. But we already have plenty of non-blocks. I'm not putting more in. Another thing I want to look at, speaking of non-blocks, is Doomsday. You run Doomsday, it's main board, and especially now that we have Quick Dodge Flexors, the downside of Doomsday being an instant is a lot less of a downside. In many matchups, in the slower matchups, this is one of your most powerful cards. It just gives you a free turn of tempo for playing it. You don't have to do anything else. You just play it and you get a free turn of tempo. Mutated Mass is another card which works really well. Easy include, and again, Quick Dodge Flexors, not only do we turn a card which would normally have 0 defense into 6 defense, but if we have Doomsday and Mutated Mass, pitch the Doomsday for Quick Dodge Flexors, this gets 6 block value out of Quick Dodge, and then this now gets 2 value. Or maybe we have, Doomsday and a Wild Ride in hand, and we pitch Doomsday and the Wild Ride, and suddenly a card which blocked for 0 now blocks for 4. So with the addition of Quick Dodge Flexors, Mutated Mass just gets so much stronger in those aggro matchups because we now have the ability to more readily turn it on our opponent's turn. The final shadow card we want to add is Soul Harvest. Why this is not a brute card, don't ask me. But it's another blue 6 that we can discard off Blood Rush. It does everything we want, and late game we can certainly set up to send a big Soul Harvest. Send a big Soul Harvest for 12 and get a bunch of cards out of our graveyard. And sort of clean up our graveyard for later on. So this goes in most games. You're just blocking for 3, you're just pitching for 3, or you're discarding into Blood Rush. Most games it doesn't do a lot, but sometimes it has relevant text. We're sitting at 11 blues right now. That is nowhere near enough blues. And so this is where we start looking at other cards. Now, Unworldly Bellow is still one of my favorite cards, and I'm still putting it in the deck as a 3 of, just because it pairs really, really well to utilize our full hand if we need to go aggressive. Pitching Unworldly Bellow as a 1 cost to go with a Wild Ride, to go with a Dread Screamer, or turning a blue and 2 Graveling Growls, an Unworldly Bellow and 2 Graveling Growls, or like 2 Diabolic Offerings and 2 Unworldly Bellows, and Unworldly Bellow into 8 damage from just your resource cards when normally the hand would be non-functional, I think is incredibly important. And I think that the value of that cannot be overstated. I know that some people are going to try fewer cards, but I really, really like it. In terms of what else makes the main board, 2 Dread Screamers. As much as it's a miss, it's an extra action point, and remember, we're losing those action points, so we need more action points in our deck. Finally, I'm putting 1 Chains of Mephetis into the deck for my shadow cards. This way, you'll see the interactions. But there's a lot of heroes who are going to want to draw, and worst comes to worst, it is a blue block 3. It's not the best card in the deck, but it is definitely worth running. Call the Grave rounds out most of the blue slots. It's just so strong. It does everything we need. It puts 2 cards in graveyard. It can turn off Blood Debt. It can go grab one of our sideboard pieces when we need it. It does absolutely everything we want to. Worst comes to worst, it's a blue. We can pitch it. It only blocks 2, which now, quick dodge flexors, of course, makes less of a downside for us. So much that you want in one card. Now, looking at the list, I'm actually going to remove an Agile Windup just for the sake of cards in deck. I'm also going to remove a Mark of the Beast. As much as these are very strong, and you can make an argument for removing Send Packing, I want to have more reasons to make my aggro opponents block. This meta will be heavily driven by the more aggressive decks, as it usually is. And if it slows down, that's great. We can take a slower angle. We can play fewer cards, which are, I'm going to call them cheekier, and have a better setup into different decks. Now, looking at this is our main deck. This is what I'm very happy with in the main deck. So now we have to look at sideboard slots. The first thing that jumps to mind for dealing with these new 1-cost attackers is This Round's on Me. Oh, come on. There we go. This Round's on Me. Now, this seems ridiculous. And certainly, there's a lot of matchups where you don't bring it in. However, Levia still has a bunch of 2 costs. Hungering Slaughter Beast, Mark of the Beast, Swing Big, Shadow of Blazonfet, Shadow Realm Horror, Dread Screamer. Being able to go blue into This Round's on Me and then another attack is really useful. And certainly for a deck like Syndra, who's reliant on a bunch of smaller attacks, This Round's on Me will give them, let's call it 4 damage, right? It will give them an extra 4 damage card. However, they will likely be able to send 4 wide or even 5 wide. And This Round's on Me, as much as it gives them a 4 damage card, it then takes all of that away from them. And it takes their daggers away from them too, which is really, really important, because that means that their chain links cannot get as wide. There are a lot of cards in Syndra's deck which require multiple Draconic chain links. And if they were relying on sending dagger into a card that says as long as you have 2 or more Draconic chain links, it gains Go Again or it gains some effect, This Round's on Me then takes that away from them. And certainly early game, being able to go a blue for This Round's on Me into like Erase Face or CNC, just to get those cards into your graveyard is relevant. It's not the best, but it does have its merits. So we got 4 more cards in here, and this is where our Call to the Grave synergies come in. Oh, I just want Shadow. There we go. So, Howl from Beyond still comes in. It still makes the cut as a very strong card. Against those decks that are looking to go longer, that are looking to delay the game against those very aggressive decks and to slow the game down, Howl from Beyond just does such an incredible amount of work. Being able to get it into rotation and just cycle it to kill your opponent is very, very, very important. I don't know why I'm looking here. I need my 2 costs, because in the 2 pitches rather, we have Deep Rooted Evil. Deep Rooted Evil, another card, does not come into the aggro matchups. Yes, it gets huge value off quick dodge flexors, but into the aggro matchups, we want all of these cards, right? We want the extra AP. We want the banish. We want the cheap 6. This is maybe the worst card, but it is still a yellow 6, and we still want that. And then finally, I think to round it out, putting one more Agile Windup in for the slower decks. is very important, right? So bringing into the slower decks, the Agile Windup, the Deeper to Evil, and the Howl from Beyond goes a very, very long way. You know what? Main deck, there you go. Perfect. We're missing something. I'm off by a card still? Interesting. This final card can be, let's see. The final card can really be a sort of flex slot. You can run a Ghostly Visit in there. Now, Mutated Mass has largely removed the need for Ghostly Visit. I know that there's some people who are trying out 2 Shadow of Blasmaphet. You can put a Guardian of the Shadow Realm in there if you expect to see a bunch of Azaleas. You can lean into Levia's ability to leverage her blues and run something like Tear Limb, which has fallen out of favor, but again, with Quick Dodge, it's just a blue Wild Ride, which is really, really good. You can put in a Convulsions. That's how we spell Convulsions. You can put in a Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell if you really want to write this on a deck registration sheet. It does a very good job of ending the game into slower decks. You can have a Reckless Swing if you want to have that extra insurance into those faster decks, right? They're looking to trade and they get low. You find that Reckless Swing, you can just win the game in a way which they cannot interact, and that is very, very important. So leaning on our blues to be that flex slot, I think, is something which will give us a lot more value. So certainly for that last card, we'll put this in the maybe. We'll go Tear Limb. Put this in the maybe. Let's see if there's anything else that really. Smashback Ailhorn is another card which is very relevant. I don't think a single copy would change things. I think if you're going Smashback, you would take out a blue Dread and you would instead put these Smashbacks in, and certainly with, again, quick dodges, because that is the huge change we got. That is the huge advantage we got. The downside of these being a blue that blocks for 2 now goes away, and they are a blue that blocks for 6 effectively, because all of your blues block for 6 into the quick dodge flexor matchups. I think that is very important. So yeah, here's the list. I will include the link in the description. Try it out. Let me know what you think, and good luck in this upcoming season.